I never believed that a building could hate you. Not until I took the night shift at the Blackwood Institute of Antiquities. It's a massive, cold labyrinth of marble and limestone, housing things that should have stayed buried in the dirt of dead empires. The pay was triple what any other security firm offered, which should have been my first warning. The second warning was the man I was replacing. He didn't look at me when he handed over his keys. He just stared at the wall behind me, his hands shaking so violently the metal chimed like a death knell. He gave me a single, laminated sheet of paper and whispered, "Follow the rules, or you'll become part of the collection." Then he ran. He didn't just walk away. He bolted into the night as if the devil himself was on his heels. I stood there alone in the flickering light of the lobby, the silence of the museum pressing against my eardrums like a heavy weight. I sat at the security desk for the first hour, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to stretch and recoil whenever I moved my head. I finally looked down at the paper. It wasn't a standard operating procedure. It was a list of survival tactics. Rule number 1. If you hear a phone ringing in the Hall of Empires, do not answer it. We didn't even have a phone line in that wing. It was all ancient stone and glass cases. But then, at exactly 12:15 a.m., it started. A sharp, mechanical ring slicing through the stillness. It was coming from deep within the Egyptian exhibit. My heart began to drum a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The rules said if it didn't stop after 3 minutes, I had to go in. I waited, counting the seconds, hoping the silence would return. It didn't. The ringing grew louder, more distorted, until it sounded less like a phone and more like a scream being fed through a meat grinder. I entered the Hall of Empires with my eyes fixed strictly on the tips of my boots, just as the protocol demanded. The air was impossibly cold, smelling of ozone and the dry, sweet scent of funerary spices. The curator is occupied," I whispered. My voice felt small and pathetic against the towering sarcophagi. The ringing stopped instantly, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like I'd gone deaf. Then I felt it. A hot, humid breath against the nape of my neck. I could hear the wet sound of something licking its lips, a long, slow rasp of a tongue over teeth that sounded like shards of glass. A voice that wasn't a voice, more of a vibration in the air, sighed my name. Elias. I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. I backed out of that room inch by agonizing inch, feeling the presence following me right to the threshold before it receded back into the darkness of the tombs. By 2 a.m., the adrenaline had faded into a dull, throbbing dread. I made my way toward the Victorian wing, my flashlight beam cutting a lonely path through the dark. This was where rule number 2 applied. The clockwork soldier must always be wound. I found him in the center of a room filled with porcelain dolls that seemed to track my movement with their glassy, unblinking eyes. The soldier was a masterpiece of brass and gears, 6 feet tall, holding a rusted saber. But when I approached, the familiar ticking of his internal mechanisms was absent. He was dead silent. His head was tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle, staring directly at the door I had just entered. I reached for the winding key on his back, but my hand froze. The brass was warm. It felt like skin. And then, From the shadows behind the display of mourning jewelry, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice. It was the sound of metal being dragged slowly across the marble floor. I swung my light toward the sound. The soldier was gone from his pedestal. In the fraction of a second my light had flickered, he had moved 10 feet. He was crouched in the corner like a predatory insect, his brass face contorted into a jagged, frozen grin. He moved again, faster than the human eye could follow, appearing behind a row of glass cases. Every time I blinked, he was closer. His internal gears began to grind, a sound like bones being crushed in a mill. I didn't try to wind him. I turned and ran, my boots thudding frantically as I bolted for the heavy oak doors. I slammed the doors shut and threw the bolt, just as a heavy weight slammed into the other side. The wood groaned. The handle turned slowly, then began to rattle with a mindless, mechanical fury. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, while on the other side, the soldier began to mimic the sound of my own sobbing breath. I spent the next 2 hours huddled in the security office, watching the monitors. Most of them were just static, but camera 4, the basement, showed something that shouldn't have been possible. The basement housed the obsidian mirror, a massive slab of volcanic glass recovered from a site that didn't appear on any map. Rule number 3 was very specific. If the mirror shows you a room that isn't the basement, break the lights. On the grainy black and white screen, I saw the mirror. It wasn't reflecting the concrete walls or the storage crates. It was reflecting a bedroom. My bedroom. I saw my own bed, my own clothes scattered on the floor, and my wife sleeping peacefully. But there was something else. A figure was standing over her. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that had too many joints. It turned toward the camera, toward me, and I saw it had no face, just a smooth black surface where features should be. It raised a long, needle-like finger to where its mouth would be, signaling for silence. I didn't think. I grabbed my heavy maglite and sprinted for the basement stairs. I burst into the room, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and rot. The mirror was glowing with a faint, sickly light. My bedroom was still there, visible within the black glass, and the thing was now reaching out a hand toward my wife's throat. I didn't look at the reflection directly. I aimed for the overhead fluorescent tube and shattered it with one desperate swing. The room plunged into total darkness. The glowing from the mirror vanished, but the silence that followed was worse. I heard the sound of glass cracking, a long, slow creak, followed by the sound of something heavy and wet stepping out onto the concrete floor. It was in the room with me. I could hear its multi-jointed limbs clicking as it moved through the dark, navigating by the sound of my frantic heartbeat. I pressed myself into a corner, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, but I didn't dare turn it on. The thing was inches away now. I could smell the ancient, stagnant water clinging to it. It leaned in close, its presence a cold void that seemed to suck the heat from my body. It didn't attack. Instead, it whispered in a voice that sounded like 1,000 dry leaves skittering across a grave. "Thank you for the invitation, Elias. The reflection is so much warmer than the glass." I felt a cold, slick hand brush against my cheek, and then the sound of the footsteps retreated toward the stairs. I stayed in that basement for 2 hours, shaking in the dark, until the first grey light of dawn began to bleed through the high, reinforced windows of the upper floors. I didn't wait for the morning shift. I didn't even grab my jacket. As I ran through the lobby toward the exit, I passed the Veiled Widow, a marble statue of a woman in mourning. Her face was always covered by a delicate stone veil, but as I sprinted past, I saw that the veil had been carved back. The face underneath wasn't marble. It was flesh, and the eyes, wide, blue, and terrified, were my wife's eyes. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I burst through the front doors into the cold morning air and didn't look back until I was 3 blocks away. I haven't gone home yet. I'm sitting in a 24-hour diner, watching the sun rise, and I'm terrified to look at my own reflection in the window, because I know that when I do, I won't see myself. I'll see the Hall of Empires, and I'll hear that phone start to ring again. Thanks for sipping tonight's tale with Haunted Brew. Don't forget to subscribe, and sleep tight if you still can.